Hello, dear learners. Welcome to the second part of the video on the performance appraisal methods. Well, in this method, I'm going to talk about some modern day methods of performance appraisal that's followed by many organizations that have seen very good performances and that have achieved some outstanding results for themselves. Let's look at the first method called the management by objectives. This was a method that was advocated and popularized by the great management guru Peter Drucker in 1950s. Was very widely used in the 80s and the 90s when he was consulting for many American organizations. The the crux of the MBO is very simple, right? Rather than looking at a very large KPA or looking at a goal that has to be achieved over the next 6 months or for the next 1 year, what Peter Drucker suggested was that we break down those goals into smaller, doable parts rather than look at or set goals for an entire year and then have that set at the beginning of the year and then do the appraisal at the end of the year, right? It does not offer much of what one wants to achieve, or sometimes the KPAs could get lost, or sometimes they could lose relevance as the organization proceeds further in those assessment or in that progress periods of that particular year. So what Peter Drucker suggested that instead of looking at an appraisal year for as an annual period, let us break that down into smaller doable parts. Like for example, break a financial year into 4 quarters of Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, and have KPAs and objectives set for every quarter, period of 3 months, and then determine what these objectives are and have the employee to understand these objectives and KPIs and be able to specifically target those objectives, have very determined and absolute focus, bring in all these resources, and then be able to achieve that. And that would possibly help an employee to be able to achieve those targets much easily, and they could proceed further to set goals in Q2, Q3, and Q4 similarly. So, how does this process begin? The process begins by identifying the larger strategic goal of the organization and having that cascaded into goals for the departments and the division, and from the division and the departments, further cascade or derive those goals for what every job has to be doing, and on the job determine the key performance areas or the key performance indicators, and then have those KPAs and KPIs being determined for a certain shorter period, like the quarter one or the quarter two or the quarter three. And look at each one of those quarters and then look at the KPAs, the KPIs that needs to be achieved, and set objectives accordingly to how we can go about achieving those key performance areas. And then once these objectives are set, have the subordinate to be able to understand these objectives. In many instances, in goal setting processes, many organizations allow the goal setting or objectives to be set by subordinates themselves. So they set these objectives and then they have these objectives reviewed by the supervisor, and the supervisor will take a look at those objectives, and then if at all they're very highly set because you have a very optimistic, over enthusiastic worker, and then the subordinate, the superior may say, now this is a little too high for you to achieve at this particular standard, so why don't we scale it down? Or if it is something that the standards or the objectives are set at a very low level, and then it's something that's very easy for the subordinate to achieve, then the supervisor will slightly scale it up to a level which is possible for the subordinate to achieve. And once it is set, those objectives are going to be understood, determined, and mutually agreed upon by the superior and subordinate. The subordinate gets all the things clarified, and superiors will assist them with necessary resources or any other data that they would want. And then once it's all clear between them, then they go about going ahead and implementing it. So once the objectives are set and determined and agreed upon, the subordinate goes about implementing, going about with his or her performance. And after that period of performance is over, we will do a performance appraisal, get a periodic, get a review of that data, and then do a performance analysis of that. And then once the performance data is available, we analyze the data, determine the performance of the employee with respect to each of those objectives, and then be able to have a performance oriented discussion, and then use that data and discussion to give positive and constructive feedback to the employee, to be able to help the employee to set further goals and improve upon that particular process as such. Well, this is how the process of MBO happens. The organization determines its goals, and then based on the goals, we have the KPIs set for every assessment period. And from those different periods or quarters, we can determine or break down objectives. Objectives are mutually set and understood and explained and clarified and mutually agreed upon by the supervisor and the subordinate. And then there is this performance period that is allowed for the employee to perform. And then once the performance is over, we monitor the performance in the progress, we evaluate, and then we offer feedback. And using that feedback, we do a feed forward process of goal setting, and once it's done, the goals and objectives are set for the next period as such. So the cycle of uh, appraisal continues into the first quarter, and once we've achieved the objectives, we complete the cycle in the first quarter, we go to the second quarter, set objectives, go ahead with the cycle, we complete that as such. And this, in fact, has been a very successful case for many organizations, and many organizations like General Electric and other organizations where Dr. Peter Drucker was consulting have really enjoyed the benefits of how a KPO, of how the MBO technique has been very helpful and useful for them in achieving the objectives. The second important new modern method that organizations use is called the 360-degree appraisal. Now, by that word 360 degree itself, we understand it's like a holistic, a roundabout, or a method that seems to be very comprehensive. Well, that's what it means. And this method was first used in the 1940s. Uh, Traditionally, performance appraisals have always been done by superiors over their subordinates. Right? It's always been a top-down approach. But the 360-degree method kind of gave a different perspective and said, why not take feedback from different sources, from all the different stakeholders with whom the employee has been interacting and doing his or her job, right? So based on that, they decided, and the 360-degree appraisal works where the appraisal data or the performance of the candidate is secured or gathered from the supervisor, from the peers, from the staff members, the co-workers, and customers, if in case the individual is interacting with customers and so on. So the 360-degree feedback or the multi-source feedback or appraisal method helps incorporate the feedback of not just one set of individuals who are appraising the performance or rating the performance. It gives us a comprehensive understanding of what different stakeholders have to say about the performance of the candidate, and we can look at it collectively and then be able to arrive at a particular judgment or particular assessment, and then help the individual to know what his or her actual feedback is, and then what are the kind of perceptions or feedback that each of the stakeholders with whom he or she has been interacting while doing the job have been able to say. Well, that's a pictorial representation of the 360 degree approach as such. An extension of that has been the 720-degree approach, which is the 360-degree is done at two levels. So 720-degree appraisal is performing or conducting a feedback after the main 360-degree appraisal is done. So it's done after the 360 is done, then you go back and you perform, and then you come back again, and then we see whether there has been a considerable improvement in the feed forward feedback that was given after the 360-degree appraisal approach. So the 720-degree appraisal method is a very integrated method of performance appraisal where the performance of an employee is evaluated from the 360 degrees. And then based on the 360-degree multi-pronged feedback and appraisal that we have received about the individual, feedback is given, or constructive uh, orientation or constructive um, feedback is given, constructive recommendations about what the employee could possibly do well in order to adjust or improve upon his performances and be able to achieve those expected standards are given. And then the employee goes back and performs that for the next period. So when we do the 360-degree twice, once it is done after the 360, then the individual gets an opportunity to go back and improve upon his performance, and then comes back, and that gives us a comprehensive period. So the pre-intervention result, which is the first 360 degree that we do, sets the baseline. And with the baseline, we're able to set the KPIs and the objectives for the next or the second half of what an employee can go ahead and perform and show that as an improvement. So this is just an appraisal of how the different methods of appraisal goes by. You have the 90-degree appraisal, you have a 180-degree appraisal, then you have a 360-degree appraisal, and then we have the second level called the 720-degree appraisal after the 360-degree appraisal. Then we have another method called the total quality management method. So that's another method that we can use, which is a comprehensive approach of measuring quality throughout the organization, right? From all the departments, from all the levels, and then be able to arrive at quality comprehensively, not just from one end or not one from one department, but be able to secure a very comprehensive, a very organization wide, which includes all the departments, all the functions, and so on. So every organization, every department, or every division is going to be setting their objectives and goals and determining the KPAs and KPIs, and collectively, supervisors will be helping the teams, the supervisors, to make an effort to achieve what they would want to achieve as that part of that. That's the TQM, which seeks to continuously improve. It helps to develop leadership, and then have the leaders to influence the subordinates. And it's often done with the motto of partnership, or with the whole motto of objective of ensuring the supervisors and the workers work together and to be able to achieve these aspects as such. And then we have organization control systems, different methods of control systems that we have in the organization, which also can help us and direct in achieving the organization goals as such. So we have the output controls, the behavioral controls, the culture, or the clan controls. The output controls will basically look at various targets that we have, the financial measures, goals, operating budgets, and the behavioral controls could include standard operating procedures, MBOs, KPIs, direct supervision. We can do that. And culture controls are basically to ensure that the behavior of the individual is well within the policy, the culture, the norms, and within the decorum standards that we have set for the organization. Another very interesting modern method that organizations have been using very popularly is called the balanced scorecard, which does not look at just one dimension of performance in the organization, but uses a metric that measures different dimensions, and then it helps us to achieve the objectives in a very comprehensive manner. It has an internal functional dimension of the business that helps us to achieve the results in an external outcome as such. So it's the internal and the external together which creates a balance, and that balance is what we're possibly looking at achieving. So data collection is provided through a very quantitative result gathering process, and then it's interpreted by the managers as such in the organization. So the BSE framework basically looks at uh, developing these um, metrics or the standards or the scorecard on the basis of the vision, mission, goals, and objectives, the strategic intent of the organization. On one side, it measures the financial outcomes. On the other side, it measures the learning and growth outcomes. It measures the customer dimension. It measures the internal process management of the organization, and how all the four will have to contribute collectively in a very balanced manner to be able to help the organization to achieve its goals and objectives. BERT is another fantastic method that many organizations have been using, something that was developed or it evolved from the World War, very commonly used by the commanders during while they were marshalling their forces and marshalling the army on the battlefield. So PERT is a program evaluation review technique. It's a statistical tool that is very useful and very popularly used in project management in many organizations. It was first developed by the United States Navy in 1950s. And it uses the CPM method, the critical path method. So it's a method of analyzing the task, looking at the whole task and breaking that down into various tasks. And those tasks will have a certain um, doable part. Is an independent tasks that can be done independently. There's some tasks that are done independently, and then aligning these independent responsibilities and tasks with the dependent tasks and so on, and then estimating the time that would be taken, the estimated time that would be taken for completion of those respective tasks. So when you look at a whole project comprehensively, break it down into various tasks and have the independent and the dependent alignment, and then estimate how much time it's going to take for each of those tasks, and identify what sort of specific micro resources that you would want to apportion for each of those tasks, will comprehensively help us to look at it. So a project definitely will have to be done in that kind of a manner, because we're looking at performing that particular project or task or completing it within a specific cost and within a specific time period as such. So this is one example or a diagram that you can see of visually or pictorically how a PERT is going to look like. Six Sigma is another interesting technique that we have. It's a quality assessment technique which helps organizations to achieve Six Sigma standards. It's a philosophy that basically helps us to reduce defects, overcome defects, and then improve the process continuously over a period of time. And it helps us to achieve Six Sigma. We'll be looking at different parts per million and achieving a zero error, or ensuring that there are fewer defective parts in a million items that we produce. So the Six Sigma is basically achieved through this particular process called the DMIC process. We have the defining the objectives, or what is the customer problem or the issue. The measuring is by knowing the magnitude of the issue or the problem, and then be able to gather data. A stands for analyzing the data, finding out the root cause of the problem, and then developing, improving on what we can do as to overcome this, and then be able to set those measures that we can see to improve, and then be able to control this process and make sure that it's all going according to how we wanted that to be. So that's how it works. It works through that input, process, output, and the DMIC formula helps us to achieve quality and then be able to overcome some of those defects as such. And these are some of the techniques that we have, which is called Kaizen, is a quality management technique, which helps us to improve processes continuously. Uh, organizations can also use the PDCA format, the plan, do, check and act PDCA technique given by Deming. And that could be something that organizations can use. Benchmarking could be identifying some of the standard industry benchmarks, or identifying standards or deriving standards from some of the best organizations in the world, and then using that to match our performances and then be able to learn from that. And these are some of the tools that we can use for continuous improvement. So these are quality management techniques, but it definitely helps uh, us to improve individual performances. But most of it can be customized according to the need of the organization, according to the job that we have in question. So we can use process charts. Process charts can help us to understand the job well, break the job into various doable parts, and then be able to map that on a particular process. We can measure performances through performance runs, and then have these graphs to explain variations, to explain the frequency of the way we've gone about doing our job, and gives us a good understanding of areas that we need to improve. Control charts can possibly tell us the upper limits and the lower limits, and then be able to know the average performances that we have. We can also look at the cause and effect diagram, which is called the fishbone diagram, to be able to solve problems or identify performance related issues, from whether it's a man related problem or a machine related problem, or a material related problem, or a method related problem, or an environment related problem. And we can also look at check sheets. Check sheets could also be able to help us ascertain whether we've done this job and not none, yes or no, and then be able to give us a good understanding of it. Histograms can help us to measure the frequency of how well we've done our job and continuously improve in terms of positive occurrences, in terms of negative occurrences, and find out which aspect of the job are we uh, repeating it again and again, or the mistakes or the errors that are occurring. So that frequency can give us a good understanding of knowing and analyzing the problem and then be able to address it well. Then the Pareto's principle, as we call it, the Pareto analysis, the 80-20 principle can also be a fantastic technique that we can use to find out how the 20% of anything impacts the 80% of the outcomes, or the 80% of anything impacts or results only in the 20%. So the 80-20 will help us to understand, to prioritize, and then be able to look at how much of those 20% efforts we need to put in to achieve the 80% of the outcomes as such. So that can be another tool that we can use. Well, this is a summary of all tools that we have in the organization, and this can possibly help us to achieve what we want to do as such in the organization. Well, another method that we have is the assessment centers. In fact, many organizations make use of the assessment centers to also be able to evaluate performances. Now, what does an assessment center do? It's a place that where individuals are sent, where an assessment center helps us to understand individuals potential as well as performance. It's a center that puts the individual over to multiple series of tests or assignments or tasks or responsibilities. It's like a mixed basket of assessment that they would put the employee on to assess, gauge the performance of the employee, and then be able to analyze. Many times, organizations send these uh, individuals, the employees, to some of these assessment centers to be having these assessment centers to do a review or a feedback, right, and give them that data. With that data, organizations can see how they could possibly utilize these individuals for a higher level. So this is most often done when we hire a group of workers at the operational level, or a group of workers at the tactical level, and we want to see where at the strategic level or in leadership positions or positions of responsibility we would want to assign. So management centers will conduct a series of tests and look at a very comprehensive assessment picture, and then be able to pass over that data to the organization, and the organization can go ahead and make some very important decisions. Another method is the HRA method, accounting method, which measures the effectiveness of employees' personal management activities, looks at assigning, budgeting, reporting, and then looks at it from an investment point of view, looking at a cost benefit analysis in terms of how much of an investment are we making on this particular individual resource, and then how much of returns are we possibly expecting or getting right now, or potentially we will expect to achieve from the performance of the employee over a long period of time. So one is associated with the costs that the organization puts in on the individual, and then looks at the return on investment that we will be able to get. So if it's not on every individual, it's done collectively for a division or a project or a division, and then we will be able to see how it's going to be useful and helpful for the organization to achieve benefits and returns from an ROI point of view, from an investment perspective, and possibly look at HR from a very profit oriented view as such. So as such, okay, that gives us a conclusion in the two sets of videos. We've looked at how organizations look at performance appraisal, the importance of performance appraisal in the management process, and what are the different methods. There are numerous methods of performance appraisals, right? So an organization has to identify which one would be the best for them, and they could possibly customize to make it more apt and suitable for that organization. So performance appraisal management is a very, very thoughtful process that is aligned or designed or aligned according to the strategic objectives of the organization, and from where we develop the KRAs and KPIs. As such, firms will have to choose from finding what type of an assessment would be really helpful for them. Whether it's a relative assessment that gives them a good understanding of the performance of the employee, or the absolute assessment. As such, Third of all, it's a very positive exercise. It should always be looked at as a positive aspect that determines judging performances or evaluating performances and constructively helping the employee to build on these performances. It's mostly a perspective where we look at it as a feed forward kind of a process. So rather than concentrate on job or concentrate on person related aspects, we should be able to look at job related aspects and be able to objectively, rationally be able to judge the performance as such. So performance management is a very continuous cycle in the organization. It runs alongside the strategy and plans of the organization. So that sums up as a whole the different process of performance appraisal and methods. It's a very fantastic tool, but it's got to be used in a very responsible manner. Organizations must understand the magnitude of it, the seriousness of this particular exercise and tool, and it should not be used as a weapon to bring down the employee or to demoralize the employee, but it must rather be used as a very constructive tool that helps the organization to the effective uh, mutual play or mutual cooperation and partnership of both the supervisors and the subordinates working together in the organization and the team. And that's when we will be able to realize and achieve the full outcome, the full benefits of the organization's achievement as a whole. Thank you for watching this video. Thanks a lot.